Good morning. Welcome to the fifth episode of Diversity and Inclusion on Air with the AAVMC. I am Lisa Greenhill, Director of Institutional Research and Diversity at the Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges. And as I mentioned, this is Diversity on Air. Our show today will feature Ms. Patricia Lowrie.
Good morning.
Good morning. And she is going to talk to us about the history of diversity in veterinary medicine. She can do it. We are here at the AAVMC's 50th anniversary celebration annual conference in Washington, D.C. And we are recording this Saturday morning, the day of our big gala tonight. And so we're going to take a little bit of time to talk a bit about diversity over the span of the association. And I am delighted that you are joining us today.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. So, how did you get involved in veterinary medicine?
Oh, wow. I come through a science background. Early on, as an electron microscopist, working with folks in pathology and mostly veterinarians who were studying one idiosyncratic something with one animal species or another, and continued to do that through several institutions, Auburn, University of California, Davis, and then ending up at Michigan State. At that transition from Davis to Michigan State was at a time that it was the late 70s, and Bakke, part of the social justice, civil rights phenomena in education, was developing. But I continued to do electron microscopy, diagnostic microscopy, as I moved from Davis to Michigan State. And my husband, I have to mention him in this process as well, is a veterinarian. And so when we talk about workplace and personal life, it has been embedded in veterinary medicine for most of my professional development.
Great. So how'd you make that leap, though?
That leap?
So I'm guessing that the veterinarian husband had something to do with kind of not assuming. Well, yeah, I get to just say I'm assuming. So what I mean is, so you had this professional moves, and but you kind of moved into a different role, working very specifically in veterinary medicine and in academic veterinary medicine. So tell us a little bit about how that happened.
About that shift?
About that shift.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I was part of a team working in the colleges of veterinary medicine, both at Davis and at Michigan State. And the transition caused or enabled me to think about veterinary medicine in a lot of its aspects. And having had a husband who'd gone to vet school, and we'd been married during all that time, and his career development, so that I got to live the experience. And so when I arrived at Michigan State, and my husband was the first Black faculty member to be in small animal medicine, I was housed at the Animal Health Diagnostic Laboratory with another Black faculty member whom I had known from our lives in Tuskegee. I had the opportunity to just meld all of those experiences together. And a very progressive dean who knew what my background was and my experiences at Davis around social justice, and said, here's the leap. I need you to come out of animal health and come into the dean's office. And I went, oh, no. that's not where my expertise lies. He said, oh, yes, 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 yes. And for those of you who may know John Welser, there is never a no. And so shortly after arriving, I did move into the dean's office. And I moved into the dean's office in the Office of Admissions. And it is there that I started to um, be specific and intentional about efforts towards diversity and inclusion. That was what he asked of me, and that was what I tried to deliver.
Okay. So what type of initiatives have you been a part of or led during the very many illustrious years of your career?
Uh, it's difficult to be reflective, and certainly this weekend for the 50th celebration, there have been lots and lots of memories and tributes that you want to pay to lots of folks who contributed to that growth, that professional growth that I was able to demonstrate. I've mentioned John Welser. I must also mention Walter Bowie, who was Dean of the College of Veterinary Medicine at Tuskegee, and there were others. But the Pew Project came along. First of all, Dean Welser said, you're going to these meetings and you're going to participate. And Billy Hooper, who is the consummate historian and also the first executive director of AAVMC, was also part of a movement that came out of Purdue with Dean Stockton, and that was called the Iverson Bell Symposium, where one of Michigan State's first the first Black graduate from Michigan State, who was Iverson Bell. So Iverson Bell, Billy Hooper, and Dean Stockton had been working on a set of initiatives around admissions. And then John Welser comes along and says, you're going to be part of this group, and everyone is going to make a contribution towards increasing the diversity within the profession. So all of us come together, and then it's the start of a movement. And this is in the late 70s or early 80s by this time. And we have several activities. We moved the Iverson Bell Symposium from its locus at Purdue. It moved national. The first national one being at Ohio State, and that was Howard Williams who supported that one, and then on to Michigan State. And when it came to Michigan State, we really cranked up the volume because now there was momentum and support. Several deans were there, and that effort actually laid the foundation for most of the things that happened nationally as we moved forward. Other initiatives, I think I really want to pay tribute to some of the things that Billy Hooper tried to do. You know, he always talks about everybody else's history. He doesn't talk about his own history. And I know we've had an opportunity to visit with him when he's here. But Billy pulled together a consortium of folks. Again, the focus was students, but he pulled together a consortium of folks with AVMA and AAVMC, and he'll have to give you the years of that, because he knows that he's chronicalized it. It's all embedded here, where we collectively talked about what can the two organizations do together around admissions. And there was then talk about retention efforts. So you just don't recruit, you don't just extend, but what do we do to create a culture within our institutions that supports students when we are successful? And shortly after that, we were part of the Pew study that's also being discussed here. And I don't quite remember the date of the Pew study. Was
Late
it
80s.
late
Yeah.
80s, early 90s?
Yeah.
And so Dean Bowie, I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
was asked to lead one of the projects on diversity within the profession, and specifically diversity in enrollment. And I co-PI'd with him on that project. And that was exciting. So I guess if you ask for milestones and initiatives, the Pew Project was historic in that 10 institutions
Mm-hmm.
raised their hands and said, we want to be part of this. And we did activities that probably could be classified today as pipeline activities.
Okay.
But our concentration was in the middle school years, grades 5, 6, and 7. We partnered with the American Association for the Advancement of Science,
Okay.
AAAS,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where all of the research had
Uh-huh.
been done. And so why invent the wheel, when it's already there? And there are lots of projects where there's base data
Sure.
that we could compare. And they had survey instruments, which of course we knew nothing about, but they had been working with this population. And so the 10 schools identified middle schools, or at that point, perhaps in still some school districts, junior high, but 5, 6, and 7, grades 5, 6, and 7, because the literature suggests that's where decision making is begun or sometimes completed for youngsters. And so we developed in-school programs. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
were after school, some of them were science fairs and speakers and those kinds of things in those grades. But it culminated, the activities were for a year. It culminated in a huge survey. And Lisa, you're going to love this because there's survey data. What you're not going to love is that we never actually fully published it. We created the final report, and that, of course, was submitted, but we never really published the data. We shared it widely,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't push the button now in this digital age and pull it up. Perhaps we should do something about that still. But it examined the perspectives of this age group, and the schools that were selected were supposed to be very diverse. It wasn't supposed to be skewed
Mm-hmm.
one way or the other, but it was supposed to be very diverse around race. Certainly during those ages, we didn't have to worry much about gender, in the sense that the population distribution was
Mm.
such that in grades we were going to have almost equal numbers
Sure.
of young people in various genders. And we looked not only at their perspectives and attitudes towards veterinary medicine, but their parents and their teachers. And so it was a multi-level approach. If I recall, and you're asking me to do that on a Saturday morning, 3,500 youngsters
Wow.
participated in this
It's a big
study.
study.
Yeah, it was a very big study, which is why you're going to be really upset with me when we finish this. Approximately 250 to 300 parents,
Oh,
and somewhere in the range of 200 or slightly less than that, teachers. And then these are teachers that were engaged with the
with the
students.
students.
Okay. So there was a continuum of effort here. And the outcome of that was that they were asked, what they thought about veterinarians and veterinary medicine, and whether or not they had an opinion about whether it was a worthy profession, comparing it with other
Mm-hmm.
professions, doctors, lawyers, etc., even policemen, teachers, etc.
Sure.
And so the tandem piece to that was the kids had to draw a veterinarian. And that was almost as telling as the perspectives. To capture a summary in 2 bullets, maybe, veterinarians were well thought of for those who knew what they were.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, they thought they were doctors for dogs and cats,
Okay.
kittens and puppies, and fairly prestigious. Not as prestigious perhaps as they might hold their own personal physician. And the drawings demonstrated kindness.
Oh,
And the folks that we worked with at AAAS had done this study around science before. And so they had a database that showed that students in this age group thought scientists were sci-fi things. They had stern glasses on, and they're kind of wicked. And here we had the gentle doctor, and but rarely did they have a complexion that represented one that they were most familiar with.
Mm.
And so that was a big milestone for us. And out of that Pew study, I think Diversity Matters came along, and that effort. And then many schools developed individual programs. Some mimicked after the work that we had done with Pew, and others went further in up the educational scale. But certainly the K through 20 pipeline was addressed disproportionately, but certainly geographically across the country.
Wow.
That was a long response.
That was great, though. And I'd love to see that data. Well, but we do know that, certainly programs like the Pew program is, I mean, it was a groundbreaking project and really kind of gave birth to a lot of things. And there are a number of programs now in existence that, have even extended some of that work.
Yes,
Certainly
right.
there's the program, Dr. Sam Miguel's program at Purdue, and some of the work that she's doing with elementary school and early education kids.
Her NIH SEPA grant, that's right. Yeah, that's outstanding work.
It's
that's
really great
done.
work that's being published, and then there's that program. I think there's a program at Texas A&M that actually builds on her program and really extends to the middle school curriculum as well. So, so thanks for your early work that gave,
interesting, and to be expected. Texas A&M and Purdue were part
of the original
the 10
project.
schools, yeah.
So tell me, as you look back over these years, what's been the most shocking kind of in terms of development of diversity initiatives, or lack of development in terms of, what kinds of things kind of surprised you?
Yeah, any sentence will do. Shocking is not quite a word I would use. I don't think surprise is even a word. I think there's a kind of disappointment and dissatisfaction is probably, and I don't want to smith it too much, but there's some upsides and some downsides. We've not made the progress we wanted.
Sure.
That's not a shock.
No.
Okay.
That's not a shock.
It's a disappointment.
Sure.
And we certainly aren't satisfied with that.
Sure.
And so the upside of that is that we haven't lost ground either.
Yeah.
And so at a time when the demographics have really shifted in enrollments in veterinary medicine, at a time when we've had peaks and valleys in the application process or the numbers of applicants applying, the actual percentage, and sometimes, depending on what year you're looking at, there's been very little variance in the actual numbers, the head counts among those who are underrepresented in the profession. And so, I mean, it's not much to hang your hat on and to be certainly nothing to be proud of, but we've not lost gain. And so that would suggest to me that even though we know that at younger ages, those who are exposed to veterinarians find it a profession that they think is a nice profession and that these are good and gentle people. We've not done the seeding that should be or could be done to not just like your veterinarian, but like them enough that you want to be one. And so what do we need to do? And so Sandy's work, certainly at Purdue, helps bring out that. She tells a story about the little boy who's reading all these books about veterinarians, and he loves the books and he's reading them all the time. But he shares with her, there's nobody that looks like him in the book. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's sufficient that we put the picture in the book that says to this little boy, this person looks like you. I really think we need to roll up our sleeves essentially and help families understand the significance and importance of the role veterinarians play in society, and that it's worthwhile. It's a contribution. It is not just about puppies and kitties, or if you know enough about the species and you're watching your Discovery Channel and you're seeing veterinarians do all kinds of things with cockatoos, etc. That isn't sufficient. Veterinarians play a significant role in the health of our populations across the globe. And it's not only worthy work, it's necessary work. And in the way that our colleagues in medicine have approached stimulating youngsters to believe they can go back into their communities and make health care contributions, I think the profession of veterinary medicine can do that as well. Especially when we're working in urban and rural areas around health issues, health disparity issues around hypertension, obesity, diabetes, etc. And so, I have a dream. How's that? I have a dream that the data suggest that it's not that folks who are underrepresented don't have pets. They have pets.
They do.
They're not necessarily using veterinary services in the same rate. And what if we could galvanize a project? How's this for you? You don't have enough projects, Lisa? What if we could galvanize a national project with lots and lots of partners where the professions, the health professions, when we're poised to do that anyway with our One Health initiatives.
Sure.
But what if part of the script a physician might write for a patient be that their exercise regime was to walk the dog that they have? Now, I would venture to say that the dog also needs the exercise. And what if there was a relationship between that veterinarian and that other health professional? And so what if we were sitting in our offices of our veterinarians waiting for appointments when we got to the veterinarian? And certainly shelters can also help with this effort. What if instead of those videos that were running on heartworm and distemper, et cetera, we're running on hypertension and diabetes and obesity, and so there would be a joint effort that showed that, along with food safety and dealing with brown spaces in our communities and all those other efforts, but a more collective, cohesive, driven approach that showed, domestically at least, I know we do a fantastic job globally and internationally around food safety and health, but domestically we've kind of missed that niche where the professions can come together. And so that would be a way, I think, that youngsters, I'll bring it back to the satisfaction question, that youngsters would see there's a contribution veterinarians are making to the community. They would come up with that understanding and therefore maybe wanting to be part of it because they always wanted to be a vet anyhow, and so they're making the contribution back, coming back to their communities. They're already thinking about ways to interact and to be part of a bigger picture. And so it would only grow. It would only grow. And as our population shifts, continues to shift. We've already had major shifts in big states like California, Texas, et cetera. But this is going to happen all across the country. And so why not stimulate youngsters, not just to see themselves in a book, but to see the contributions that they're making to society, and community health. Again, these were very long answers. You didn't tell me to take only 20 seconds. You know me well enough to know that I might not do that. So,
well, we have made progress. We haven't lost ground, and there is some disappointment in not making more progress during these 50 years. But what do you find encouraging about the work that's been done? And about the progress that has been made?
You and I often, and with others, have talked about you don't know what you don't know. And I think in doing the work and trying to increase the diversity, and with increasing the diversity, the excellence in the profession, I think we have to stay on message. And I think we're doing that. I think the message is we need to be inclusive, and it is in the profession's best interest to do so. So while, as we will hear some of those complain about you talking to the choir, and I respond, the choir needs practice, and we have that little repartee. Sure. I think our choir is growing.
Yes.
And I think that's the progress. I think it probably is a misnomer to even call it a choir at this point. I think the congregation, to use the metaphor, is growing, that wants to talk about, that is not uncomfortable having the difficult conversations about where should we apply the effort. And it's not a where, it is how do we apply the effort everywhere, in a continuous stream, without the pressure of facing a failure as such, but just knowing that progress comes in increments. It's a slow process, and to have the patience to stay in the fray long enough to stimulate others, to stimulate that parent, to stimulate that teacher, to support this youngster's dream, to be a veterinarian. And maybe we would even have a competition every spring that would have each youngster bring another youngster to a veterinarian or to a program that would also stimulate their interest. And at the lowest denominator, expand their horizon and understanding of the contributions that veterinarians make. I think you'll remember once before, I wanted to start a campaign of have you hugged your veterinarian today? I wanted big billboards that said as you drive up the freeway, say, have you hugged your veterinarian today for the contributions they make to not society. Just animal health, but to society. Yeah.
So how do you see the challenges that we face in doing diversity work in the profession now compared to then? What, are the challenges significantly different now?
I would say no. What's been your experience as you go around the country?
I think that the delivery of the message gets tweaked, depending on your audience. And I think that our expanded focus on not just diversity and kind of this very structural, like, let's count people and make sure that there's a representation framework. I think that we've moved to something broader to say, well, okay,
Mhm.
we need the people there, we
Mhm.
want the people here, and we need to make sure that this is an environment that not only supports having them here, but actually supports them and everyone else as well. And I think that that is something I think that in diversity work in general is an evolution that we've
Yes.
moved to, towards certainly in the last 10, 15 years, but certainly even more so when we think, over the lifespan of this organization.
Yes. I thought you were also going to say something about how we've grown in our inclusive work
Absolutely.
as well. Yes, we started out where this was a discussion around race. Then it became a discussion around gender. But I think the work that's being done now also recognizes that faith-based diversity
sure.
is as important. We geography. That's my pause. We just talked about geography before coming on air, but recognition and expansion of inclusion around our LGBTQ communities. And other disabilities, and recognizing that we're not just one thing, any of us, that we have multiple identities, and all of those identities have a set of experiences that are embedded in each of us, and we bring all of ourselves into the workplace, into the profession, to make contributions. That broaden the potential of the profession.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this recognition of intersectionality and multiple identities is certainly something that's different, and I think that at least in my work, I do see people kind of struggle to wrap their head around that in the sense of, well, okay, but which one comes first?
We laugh, but
well, which one comes first? And I remember, that I guess during the 2008 election that a veterinary colleague came to me and they made an assumption about my political leanings. First of all, they just made an assumption. And then it was, you must be like so tortured trying to decide between Hillary and Obama. And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm not tortured. And he said, and this individual is a veterinarian, and I mean, this happens in veterinary medicine and certainly external to it as well, but it was just like, you're not tortured? No, I'm good. I'm like, I'm good. There are policy issues that I've been focused on,
Yes.
And I think that this issue of background and certainly geography, as well as socioeconomic status, class is, I think, the new diversity frontier that we're dealing with. And in our applicant work, our most recent survey, we found that nearly 30% of applicants, almost 30% of this current cycle of applicants were either Pell Grant recipients or Pell eligible. And that's that dwarfs, frankly, our male applicant population, and it dwarfs our students, our applicants of color as well. And so, that would be kind of like the next big diversity group, and so I think that the work is evolving and helping people understand that all of these things coexist. I think is the challenge that we face now that maybe we hadn't gotten to at the launch of AAVMC, certainly. So the work is changing. The fundamentals are still the same, but just kind of what our understanding of humanity is different.
I was about to say that we might have entered the work or entered the room through one window. But as we get in there and begin to knead around and our learning edges begin to change, we learn more about ourselves. Therefore, we are poised to learn more about others. We realize you're not tortured.
No.
because you're not one today and one another the next day. You are all of you every day. And we need to treat our colleagues and our students just that way.
Yeah.
They bring all of themselves to our classrooms and our programs. And that's especially true when we're talking about the pipeline, you know, that this is a welcoming profession. That's the challenge.
Mm.
You know, how do we do that? How do we say, not only are we doing good work in our communities, but we welcome you to join us.
Yeah.
I think that's an important message to also put out there.
So looking forward,
Mm.
as you know, our motto for our anniversary is 50 and forward. So for the next 50 years, what advice would you give us?
You know, I never think about giving advice.
Really?
I think, well, the last statement I said, I think is
Sure.
probably an important one, not just come, but be part of that progress for the next 50 years. We want you. More importantly, we need you. And we hope that we provide a sense that you're welcomed in this process. And I mean, these are simple words, but at the same time, I think it's important. But I think the profession has a role as well. I think the profession cannot ever back off of tooting its own horn. It too has to send the message to the general public of the contributions that the profession makes to everyday life. And the two efforts together, stimulating youngsters to be willing to be part of it in a profession that's singing its own praises, will help others adjust their own attitudes and perspectives about this wonderful full profession that I've certainly been part of for the last 45, almost 50 years of my professional life. The other, I think, important advice, and I'll use your word on this, for those of us who are in the vineyard working on this, is patience. You know, yeah, you wanted it yesterday. And what was it about what I said you didn't get? You know, no. We have to meet people where they are. And every person that stops to listen is a gift. And it is an effort that is built on building relationships, one person, one activity, one event at a time. And so the need, and I have to be reminded, I know I have to practice what I preach sometimes, but to have the patience and to take time out when it's appropriate to take time out, but to stay there on message that this is in society's best interest and the profession's best interest. And it's a worthy endeavor and a wonderful profession to be part of in the next 50 years as well.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks
You're
for
welcome.
joining me.
Oh, well, this was quite interesting for me and enjoyable, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity and the invitation.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Mhm.
So, at the end of our episode, you will see a short video that features Dr. Billy Hooper, whom Ms. Lowrie referenced early on in the show. At our annual diversity committee meeting, he made some comments that also kind of referenced some really major milestones in the history of not only AAVMC, but also the effort to increase diversity in veterinary medicine. And so I will be adding those comments to this show.
started some 50 years ago that you're celebrating now, we only had 18 schools of veterinary medicine. And our student body, as I told you, pretty much was a reflection of my own experience. In those first few years, 4 people stepped forward to begin our focus on minority issues and ultimately where you are today. One of those was Dr. Walter Bowie at Tuskegee University, who is deceased. The second one was Dr. Eugene Adams, who just recently, a couple of weeks ago, passed away. A third one, though, was a white dean, Dr. Jack Stockton at Purdue. And the fourth one was a African-American veterinarian who was a graduate of Michigan State University, Dr. Iverson Bell. And he had surfaced as a major professional leader. He served as vice president of the AAVMA. He served as president of the Indiana VMA. He was involved in academic affairs from K through 12. And those 4 people, all now deceased, essentially over a 5-year period, began to raise the issue of minority recruitments, largely focused on African Americans at that time, and what we might do to that effect. Dr. Bowie introduced the first resolution almost 45 years ago that would cause this organization to give some attention to minority recruitment. The deans rejected that motion at that time, and I was present and heard that happen, but all it did was motivate those few key leaders to work and try even harder. And Tuskegee University, Bowie and Adams clearly led that effort from that area, but Dr. Iverson Bell, the practitioner, and Dr. Jack Stockton kind of led the entire academic community, and all of you recognize that through your current Iverson Bell activity. About 40 years ago, though, the deans decided that they needed a committee on minority affairs. That was the very first committee, AAVMC committee, established or authorized minority affairs. It had only a very few representatives, half, a third of what was in this room at that time. But one person stood out and became the visible leader, and that was Dr. Pat Lowrie. Dr. John Welser, who will be recognized tomorrow night as the leader in veterinary medicine, was the dean at Michigan State at that time, and he said when he asked, made the announcement that they would have some focus on minority affairs at Michigan State, the first person to knock on his door and offer their services and offer their leadership was Dr. Pat Lowrie. Pat was the leader of that committee for years and years. She was the person who said we need data and information. And initially the deans collectively rejected that and refused to allow the collection of data on students and minority students at that point. Pat worked under the table to start that effort and collect that information, and within a few years we had added that to the comparative data survey, and we now have good data for the last 35 years, I suppose, with Pat. In addition, Pat was there to move us to a national symposium or meeting on minority affairs. And the first national Iverson Bell Symposium was held in 1988 at Ohio State University, and Pat was there. The next year, the next symposium, just 29 years ago now, was held at Michigan State, and all of us in veterinary medicine heard for the first time the word diversity. and it came from Pat. Pat was the one who introduced the concept of diversity beyond racial diversity to the larger issues that you have been addressing here, and led that effort and called our attention to it, and it has been a part of our heritage and activity since that time. She was then next very much involved in a 1993 symposium, our first national symposium and workshop on diversity other than the Iverson Bell, and she was visible and a leader there. When we had the Pew study in the 1988s, early 1990s, the deans collectively said that some significant part of that $5 million proposal must be spent on addressing minority and diversity issues. And because Walter Bowie was still the dean at Tuskegee at that time, the deans asked him to undertake that effort. Dr. Bowie said, I will accept the visible leadership of that, but I will not do anything unless Pat Lowrie, excuse me, I worked with Pat Stormont for many years, my mind's going. Pat Lowrie will lead that effort. So Pat led the major research effort on minority affairs and diversity in the early 1990s, working with the American Academy of Veterinary, Academy of Science in that regard. And while her study has never published in a referee journal, it served throughout the 1990s as the major basis for our efforts in minority and diversity efforts. Part of those efforts, led by Pat through those many years, finally led in the late 1990s or 2000 the acceptance by the American Veterinary Medical Association of diversity affairs, minority affairs, as a major issue for the profession. Just 15 years ago, the profession accepted what Pat had been working for so, and with AAVMC, obviously, for so many years. And she still continues that effort today. One of the things she said that I thought captures Pat in a major way, when you were discussing Plum Island, she said, let's reach out and make them a part of us. That has been her mode of operation for these many years. It's not to just address her colleague here from Purdue or this room here, but think about minority affairs and diversity issues in the larger national context and format. And then to not only lead those efforts, but work behind the scenes consistently to achieve that. So I think where you are today, as I see this, you all owe a tremendous debt to Pat. She has been there in the trenches for over 40 years. She has been the major leader and visible leader of this effort for those 40 years. And when I saw on the program this morning that she was being recognized by some scholarship activity, I could not have been more proud. And I said to myself, if the moderators will allow me, I have got to say this, stand up and say this. So I congratulate Pat, obviously, but more than that, and in a larger sense, I congratulate all of you. I know that you are frustrated. I know that you feel there is still a long way to go. And from your discussions of things like microaggression, which was a new word to me, totally a new word to me today, I know that there are still budding issues, surfacing issues that you must continue to address. But I would leave you with the thought that all of your efforts in doing everything you do, you stand on the shoulders of some very significant people, Walter Bowie, Eugene Adams, Jack Stockton, Iverson Bell, and Pat Lowrie. And I would want you to applaud those efforts before I go.
If you're also interested in more information about the history of diversity in veterinary medicine, and specifically in academic veterinary medicine, you should definitely pick up a copy of Navigating Diversity and Inclusion in Veterinary Medicine from Purdue University Press. Dr. Hooper, as well as Pat and myself, and Dr. Cipriani and Dr. San Miguel, all are authors in that book. And Dr. Hooper's chapter really goes into a lot of detail about this subject, and it's really just a great read, and I learn something every time I review it. So definitely pick up a copy of that. Yes.
Thank you for mentioning our book, our work, a work of love, because that too was a milestone, and then I don't want to. But also, in those chapters there's recognition of other programs across the country. The Velvet Bound program at Michigan State that also has a science club component for elementary school kids, the Cornell program, et cetera. And so there too, you can learn more about efforts across the country.
Yes, so that is, again, available at Purdue University Press, but it's also available likely on your local online bookstore, which I guess isn't local, but local on your keyboard now. So with that, we will bring this episode to a close. The next episode of Diversity and Inclusion on Air will feature Dr. Stacy Pritt, current president of the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative, and that will be on March 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So join us then, live or later. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.